There's something about the dead of night that makes the world feel different. Like the darkness itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Most people think of midnight as just another hour, but if you've ever been awake when everyone else is asleep, you know it's more than that. It's when the shadows seem to move on their own, when every creak and whisper feels like a warning. I used to think those stories about things lurking in the dark were just that, stories. But after what I've experienced, I know better. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true horror stories that happened when the world was supposed to be safe and silent. If you think nothing bad can happen after midnight, you might want to keep the lights on, because once you hear these stories, you'll never feel safe after the clock strikes 12 again. I've always loved the quiet of my neighborhood at night. There's a kind of peace that settles over the houses, the streetlights casting soft pools of yellow on the empty sidewalks. Most nights I'd curl up on the couch with a book or my phone, the hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional distant siren, the only sounds breaking the silence. It was comforting in a way, like the world was finally taking a breath. That night started like any other. My parents were out of town, and I was alone in the house. I didn't mind. I'd always been independent, and besides, nothing ever happened in our neighborhood. I made myself a cup of tea, the kettle whistling sharply before fading back into the hush. I remember glancing at the clock, 12:17 a.m., and thinking how strange it was that I felt so awake. I settled in, scrolling through my phone, the blue light casting shadows on the walls. Every so often I'd hear the old floorboards creak, but I told myself it was just the house settling. Still, there was something about the silence that felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was pressing in on me. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the glow of my screen, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It started with small things. The porch light flickered, just for a second before snapping back on. I heard a soft tap against the window, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I got up, peering through the blinds, but all I saw was my own reflection staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I even laughed a little, shaking my head as I walked back to the kitchen to refill my mug. The tile was cold under my feet, and the hum of the appliances felt louder than usual, almost like they were trying to drown out something else. I tried to focus on the normalcy of it all, the familiar smells, the warmth of the mug in my hands, but the unease kept growing. I went back to the living room, but this time I couldn't relax. I kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see something staring back at me. I tried to reason with myself. It's just your imagination, I thought. You've watched too many scary movies. But then I heard it again, a soft, deliberate tap, like fingernails on glass. My heart started pounding. I stood up, my hands shaking, and forced myself to look. At first I saw nothing, just the darkness outside, the faint outline of the neighbor's house across the street. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it, a pale face, pressed against the glass, eyes wide and unblinking. I froze. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The face didn't belong to anyone I recognized, was gaunt, almost skeletal, with dark circles under its eyes and a twisted, hungry smile. I stumbled backward, knocking over my mug, hot tea splashing across the floor. The face didn't move. It just stared, as if it was waiting for me to do something. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to dial 911, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hit the numbers. When I looked back, the face was gone. I heard footsteps, soft, shuffling, moving away from the window, disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the yard, the street, even the neighbor's property, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just the faint outline of a handprint smeared across the glass, as if someone or something had been watching me, waiting for the perfect moment. I never saw that face again, but I still can't shake the feeling that it's out there, somewhere waiting for another window, another night. And every time I hear a tap on the glass, I remember that smile, and I wonder if it's come back for me. There's a special kind of fear that comes from being alone in your own home, where every shadow feels personal and every sound echoes in your chest. But the truth is, the dead of night doesn't care where you are. Sometimes, the real nightmares find you when you're far from home, out on the open road, with nowhere to hide and no one to call for help. I've spent more nights than I can count behind the wheel of my rig, hauling freight across endless stretches of highway. There's a rhythm to it, the hum of the engine, the steady thump of tires on asphalt, the way the world narrows down to just you, the road, and whatever's caught in your headlights. Most nights, I find comfort in that solitude. But every now and then, the darkness feels like it's pressing in, and the road starts to feel like it's swallowing you whole. It was just past 2 a.m. when I found myself on a lonely stretch of Route 17, somewhere between nowhere and nothing. The radio was nothing but static, and my only company was the occasional sign flashing by in the darkness. I'd been driving for hours, fighting off the kind of bone-deep fatigue that makes your eyelids heavy and your thoughts slow. I rolled down the window, hoping the cold air would keep me awake, but it only made the night feel emptier. That's when I saw him, a figure standing on the shoulder, illuminated for a split second in my high beams. He was tall and thin, wearing a faded jacket and jeans. His thumbs stuck out in the universal sign for a ride. Every instinct told me to keep going, but something about the way he stood there, so still and out of place, made me ease off the gas. I pulled over, the gravel crunching under my tires. He didn't move at first, just stared at me with this blank, almost hollow expression. I leaned over and unlocked the passenger door. "You need a lift," I called out, trying to sound casual. He slid into the cab without a word, the door closing with a soft click. Up close, he looked even stranger. His skin was pale, almost gray in the dashboard light, and his eyes seemed too large, too dark. He didn't smell like sweat or cigarettes or anything at all, really. Just cold air and something I couldn't place. "Where are you headed?" I asked, glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. He turned to look at me, his lips barely moving. "Just up the road," he said, his voice flat and distant, like he was remembering the words instead of speaking them. I tried to shake off the unease, focusing on the road ahead, but the silence in the cab was thick, broken only by the low rumble of the engine. I kept waiting for him to say something else, to ask about the weather or the time, but he just stared straight ahead, hands folded neatly in his lap. A few miles passed, and I started to notice things that didn't make sense. The temperature in the cab dropped, my breath fogging up the windshield, even though the heater was blasting. The radio, which had been nothing but static, suddenly crackled to life, playing an old song I hadn't heard since I was a kid. My dad's favorite, the one we used to listen to on late-night drives. I glanced at the hitchhiker, but he didn't react. He just kept staring, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I tried to make small talk, anything to break the tension. "You from around here?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." The words sent a chill down my spine. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness swallowing the headlights. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 a.m., and realized we'd been driving for nearly 20 minutes. But I hadn't seen a single sign, a single car, not even a mile marker. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should let me out here." I looked around, but there was nothing, just empty fields and the endless black sky. "You sure?" I asked, but he was already reaching for the door. He stepped out into the darkness, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I watched him in the side mirror, expecting him to disappear into the night. But he just stood there, staring after me as I pulled away, his figure growing smaller and smaller, until it vanished completely. When I finally stopped at a gas station, I told the clerk about the hitchhiker. He just shook his head. "You're not the first to see him," he said quietly. "But you're lucky. Most folks who pick him up, they don't make it to the next town." I never saw the hitchhiker again, but sometimes late at night, when the road is empty and the radio crackles with old songs, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another driver, another ride, another chance to remind someone that the dead of night is never as empty as it seems. There is a special kind of fear that comes from meeting the unknown out on a deserted highway where help is miles away and the darkness feels endless. But sometimes the most chilling horrors don't find you on the open road. They slip quietly into the places you trust most. If you thought that was terrifying, wait until you hear what happened to someone who thought they were safe in their own bed. I've always thought of my apartment as a safe haven, a tiny, cluttered space 3 stories up, with a heavy deadbolt and a view of the city lights. I'd lived there for almost 2 years, and in all that time, nothing truly bad had ever happened. I'd grown used to the hum of traffic below, the distant wail of sirens, the muffled laughter of neighbors through the walls. It was my own little world, and I never imagined anything could break through. That night, I went to bed around midnight, exhausted from a long shift. I remember locking the door, double-checking the windows, and setting my phone on the nightstand. The city outside was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like a warning you can't quite put your finger on. I drifted off quickly, comforted by the familiar creaks and groans of the old building. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was a dream, or maybe it was the sudden, unnatural stillness that settled over the room. I lay there for a moment, eyes closed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then I heard it. A soft, deliberate scraping sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. My heart started pounding, and I forced myself to sit up, straining to listen. The sound came again, closer this time. I glanced at the clock, 3:14 a.m. The hallway outside my bedroom was pitch black, the door slightly ajar. I told myself it was just the building settling, maybe a neighbor coming home late. But then I heard footsteps, slow, careful, almost hesitant, moving across the living room floor. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. My mind raced through every possibility. Had I forgotten to lock the door? Was someone really inside? Or was I just letting my imagination get the best of me? I reached for my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I dialed 911, but didn't hit call. Not yet. I needed to be sure. The footsteps stopped just outside my bedroom door. I could hear breathing, ragged, uneven, like whoever was out there was struggling to stay quiet. I held my breath, listening as the doorknob turned, ever so slightly, and the door creaked open another inch. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I watched as a shadow stretched across the floor, long and distorted by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. The air in the room felt colder, heavier, as if something was sucking all the warmth away. Then I saw it, a hand pale and thin, with fingers that seemed too long, curling around the edge of the door. The rest of the figure followed, moving in a way that was all wrong, joints bending at odd angles, head cocked to one side, as if listening for something only it could hear. It stepped into the room, and I realized with a jolt of terror that it wasn't just a person. Its eyes were too large, reflecting the light in a way that made them look almost silver. Its mouth hung open, lips pulled back in a silent snarl. It moved closer, each step slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact. I tried to speak, to shout, but no sound came out. The thing crouched at the foot of my bed, its head tilting back and forth, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. I could hear its breathing, wet, rattling, almost animalistic. Suddenly it lunged forward, impossibly fast, and I threw myself backward, scrambling against the headboard. My phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the worst. but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The door hung open, swinging gently in the draft. My heart was still racing, my sheets twisted around me like a cocoon. I stumbled out of bed, searching every corner of the apartment, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. The only evidence was a set of long, thin scratches on the inside of my bedroom door, as if something had tried to claw its way in. I never figured out what I saw that night. It was a nightmare, or maybe something else found its way in when the world was asleep. All I know is, I haven't slept with the lights off since. And every time I hear a noise in the dead of night, I wonder if it's come back. Waiting for the moment I let my guard down and finally let it in. There's a reason the dead of night has always been the setting for our darkest fears. When the world is quiet and shadows stretch across empty rooms, it's easy to believe that something is watching, waiting, or lurking just out of sight. Whether you're alone in your own home, driving down a deserted highway, or lying awake in bed, the night has a way of making the ordinary feel strange, and the strange feel terrifyingly real. Maybe you've felt it too, that sudden chill, the sense that you're not as alone as you thought, the urge to check the locks one more time before you try to sleep. If you've ever had your own encounter with the unknown after midnight, I want to hear about it. Share your dead of night horror stories in the comments below, because sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that really happened. And remember, just because the world is asleep doesn't mean you're safe. Sometimes the things we fear most wait for the darkness, slipping in when we least expect it. So next time you find yourself awake in the dead of night, listen closely. You never know what might be listening back.